Parliament looks set to hold public meetings on regulating WhatsApp alongside other over-the-top services like Skype and Google Hangouts. Mobile networks Vodacom and MTN are calling for these services to be controlled. Let's discuss this with technology analyst Arthur Goldstuck, who joins us via Skype. Arthur, good morning to you. Thanks for your time. Just remind us of why local cell phone service providers want these OTT services regulated.
The reason they give on the surface is that they want a level playing field because they claim that the likes of WhatsApp and Facebook are actually providing telecommunications services, and the local operators have to comply with various license regulations, tax regulations and the like to be able to operate, whereas these players are operating over the top, that's the term they use, OTT, over the top of their networks without having any cost of using the networks and also without having to comply with local regulations.
How sound is that argument, do you think?
It's a very flimsy argument, in fact. The one area where they could probably convince Parliament and where we have seen precedents is in terms of compliance with tax regulations. So any revenue that's generated by Skype, for example, if people buy Skype credits in South Africa, would be potentially subject to tax regulations. But something like WhatsApp, for example, very little money is being spent on it by anyone, anywhere, and certainly minimally in South Africa. So they might impose that regulation, but it's not going to mean much. The real issue here is that these services are cutting into the revenues of the operators. So instant messaging like WhatsApp and WeChat and BBM, for example, is incredibly cheap to use per message, whereas SMS is incredibly expensive. And we've argued for many years, for well over a decade, that SMS pricing is not tenable, it's not even moral, because it's costing the networks very, very little to transmit an SMS, but they're charging between 50 and 80 cents a message. So it was waiting for a technology to come along and disrupt that, and that's what instant messaging has done. So we, in fact, hope that instant messaging will kill off SMS or finally persuade the operators to bring the cost down to a reasonable level. As far as voice is concerned, that's a different story. That's the lifeblood of the operators. But the new generation more and more isn't particularly interested in voice. So you're seeing voice use by younger people dropping as they move over to text and images and the like. So the networks are actually caught between a rock and a hard place. There's declining voice from younger users and replacement of their voice services by the likes of Skype, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and so on. And they're quite desperate, and they're hoping that the regulator will save them as opposed to their own business models.
Has this argument been raised in other countries? And if so, Arthur, what has been the outcome of these international precedents?
It's becoming a pervasive argument. There almost seems to be collusion amongst operators worldwide to push the same message forward, because regardless of the country, you hear the same arguments, which is quite strange because circumstances are so different in each country. India, for example, there was a massive debate, and in fact, the equivalent of the same Parliamentary Portfolio Committee in India recommended some kind of regulation of these players. But ultimately, the regulator decided not to go ahead with it because they were being asked to regulate technology as opposed to communications. Morocco has seen the major networks all simultaneously cut off these services, which again points to collusion. And I think that's the problem for the networks, is that they're having to collude to speak the same language, to be completely equivalent in their messaging, and therefore they come across as being anti-consumer. So Morocco is probably the only country that we know of at the moment where there's been active action against these players, and the regulator has supported that action. In the UK, there's at the moment talk that the regulator there, Ofcom, will in fact be investigating the same issue, but there's no specifics on the table yet.
Arthur Goldstuck, thank you so much for unpacking that for us. He's Managing Director at Worldwide Works.